It's a great pleasure to welcome this distinguished panel of great women back to campus to talk about women of color at Wesleyan. It's a very timely conversation. We have had very intense discussions at Wesleyan over the last, probably over the last 50 years, but in particular over the last year, very intense discussions about what would it really mean for Wesleyan to live up to its name of Diversity University. What would it really mean for Wesleyan to be a community of authentic inclusion and equity? And as you can imagine, those discussions aren't always calm and sedate and academic. They're personal, they're charged, they're political, they're meaningful, and they are characterized by a shared sense of purpose and commitment. And a shared sense of purpose and commitment, I think, brings our panelists here today. These are women who have been shapers of their own fields, leveraging, as one says today, their education to do remarkable things well beyond the university and in universities, Wesleyan included. So it's a great day to be at Wesleyan, and one of the reasons why, right? One of the reasons why is because of this Dwight Greene Symposium. So thank you very much for being here, and David Hill is going to take over right now. Give him a hand.
Good afternoon, everybody. Please allow me the informality of wearing this Wesleyan football sweat jacket up here before you as opposed to a blazer. But I played while I was here for 4 years, started for 3, and I wasn't able to accomplish what the Wesleyan football team did today in my time winning a little 3. So it's a point of pride. This year, as the president said, marks the 21st anniversary of the Dwight L. Greene Symposium. For those who had a chance to know him, as I did as a young alum, he's somebody who's truly worthy of marking the life and the legacy that he lived and left. And so I'm incredibly proud, as the Alumni of Color Council Chair, to be co-sponsoring this along with the WBAC. And we've got a Wesleyan Black Alumni Council, and we've got a fantastic panel discussion for you. And I'm at this point going to introduce our panelists. So to my right is Joyce Hall, class of '78. An associate professor and the director of field practicum placement and career development in the Masters of Public Health program at Long Island University in Brooklyn, and a current member of the Wesleyan Board of Trustees and a member of the Alumni of Color Council. To her right is Se-Yun Lee, who is the policy director in the Executive Office of Education for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, working directly for Governor Deval Patrick, and also an adjunct lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. To her right is Marina J. Melendez, Wesleyan class of '83, who is our moderator for today's panel and is the interim chief diversity officer and Title IX coordinator and dean of the Wesleyan class of 2014. To her right is Maria Santana Guadalupe. Got to make sure I get that right. Yeah. Class of '98, who is the New York anchor correspondent for CNN and en Espanol, part of the CNN News Network. And finally, last but not least, so to speak, to the farthest right is Simone White, class of '93, currently a PhD candidate in English at the CUNY Graduate Center, professor, author, and an award-winning poet. So, please give them your attention, and let's have a robust Wesleyan conversation.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I know it's difficult. It's a beautiful day. Who would have ever believed it was 64 degrees on November 2nd, and Wesleyan winning the title? I'm going to just go right into the questions we have for our panelists, and they will answer these questions, and I also have some specific ones for each of our panelists as well. Let's begin. Joyce, I'm going to start with you, and we'll go this way. Please reflect on how you went about choosing a college, what you expected to find, and whether those initial expectations were borne out. And with that, why Wesleyan?
One of the things that came to mind when I was looking at colleges was really where I wanted to be. And I wanted to be close enough to New York that I can get home, but not too far. And Wesleyan was the place that really fit my expectations. I was fortunate to come up 2 years before I started at Wesleyan because my brother was here. And the class of '76, he came up in the summer of '72. There was a program called Prospect Wesleyan for students of color, for them to get an experience 2 months before the other students did. And I was fortunate to come up. I saw the experience here at Wesleyan, fell in love with the campus, and I was looking at how the students interacted with one another, and also the reputation, location, and faculty-student ratio for classes. And in fact, it was borne out, my initial expectations.
So thank you. As I reflect upon who I was at the tender age of 17 or 18, and thinking about making the transition from high school to college, I think one of the important factors that I considered is what will the environment be like. I had the opportunity to attend a high-quality high school, which from an academic standpoint fully prepared me for college, but it was a community in which I was one of maybe a handful of students of color. And as I reflected upon that experience and the experience that I wanted to have when I transitioned into college, I was looking for an environment that would offer me a different set of experiences and the opportunity to interact with an entirely new set of individuals. So similar to Joyce, I actually had previous contact with Wesleyan, not through a sibling, but through a friend of mine who attended Wesleyan the year before I graduated. And as we all know, oftentimes the best cheerleader for an institution are the students themselves. And so this individual was very, very compelling in terms of describing his own experiences here. And he told me that he was experiencing exactly what I hoped to experience, which was, again, the opportunity to live and learn and be with folks in an environment that was entirely different from the one that I was leaving. So I had very high expectations coming in, and I am thrilled to say that all of those expectations were not only met, but exceeded during my 4 years as an undergraduate.
Well, I think that I really didn't know what to expect from college when I was considering going to college, and that's because I am one of the first people in my family that did get the opportunity to go to college, so I didn't really have that many people around me who could talk to me about what it was to be in college, what it was like to live on campus and to have that type of experience. So it was a little scary for me to think about, attending a university when I hadn't really met too many people who had done it firsthand. But I had a lot of people around me who were encouraging me to do it and to find a place where I could thrive in an academic environment. And I visited a couple of places, a couple of other small liberal arts colleges, as well as some of the bigger state universities. And one of the things that I wanted to find in the school was a place where I felt that a person like me, Dominican immigrant from a urban neighborhood in New York City who went to New York City public schools all her life and who didn't have that many role models going to college or who could tell her about that experience, somebody like me could thrive in that environment and could feel comfortable in that environment and could find the support that I needed to be in that environment. And I think when I came to Wesleyan, I visited on a school trip like my junior year and talked to a lot of different people, was taken on tours by some of the students, joined some student groups, and that visit was it was like transformational for me because I actually saw myself here. And at any other place I've been, I said, this is a good place, I'm sure I got a great education, but I never really saw myself there. And when I came to Wesleyan, that all changed. I felt a connection with the people here, and I felt like somebody like me could really do well here. And then the thing that really was definitive for me was the pre-frosh weekend, the Student of Color pre-frosh weekend, because I got to meet, you know, a lot of people from my community with my background who were all here, and those weren't people that I was used to being around. So, and I saw how tight-knit that community was when I was looking for a college, and I think that was definitely one of the most important things and that allowed me to choose Wesleyan and to come to Wesleyan. And of course, you know, it's a great place with great academics, and you get a lot of support here, and that was very important. Did it meet my expectations? I think it actually surpassed my expectations, because I adore Wesleyan, and I had such a good experience here that I recommend to anybody that I meet, try Wesleyan, because it really did. It really did.
I agree. When I came, my parents were Wesleyan alumni. My father was class of '73, and my mother was MAT '72, I guess is what it's called. And I was surrounded by especially Black Wesleyan alumni all my life. And when it came, you know, when I was 16 or 17 and it was time for me to choose a school, I mean, I did see myself. I mean, I had always seen myself as part of this community. And when I arrived as a visitor, I think for my parents' 15th reunion, it must have been in 1988, I just knew that this is where I should be, and I applied early decision. And sure enough, it was really a perfect fit. But I had a similar sort of pre-fresh weekend experience. Not only did I meet some of my closest friends, who are still my closest friends 25 years later, but the wildness of the place, like, it was wild, and it was, I have lots of friends who visited Wesleyan at that same time, who I met later in life, who said, I couldn't do it. And I was like, no, this is great. I totally want to do this. And it was, and not because I wanted to experience a kind of like loose environment, but because there was something culturally rich and incredibly fun and spirited and gleeful about the people I met here. And I wanted to be part of that. So it certainly did meet all those expectations.
It's very interesting. I think sometimes when people look at women of color, they assume we all have similar experiences, even if we are different in decades. I was first generation, and I never saw Wesleyan. I didn't even have it on my list. I had a phenomenal high school counselor who took my first list and tore it apart and said, look at these schools and then decide where you want to apply. And I was fortunate enough that Wesleyan accepted me, and the first time I came on campus, I knew I was home. It was a real fit, but my poor parents had no clue what they were doing when they dropped me at the door. But it's really interesting to see the differences in our experiences. I'm curious, by show of hand out in the audience, is there anyone from high school contemplating? Don't be shy. All right, great, okay. So I hope you can glean a little bit from our experiences here. I'd like to continue and ask Joyce, since she's our honorary member of the class of '78, as a member of one of the first classes of women, what were your most trying experiences your first year? Can you talk in general about the Black women's experience when you were here with them? And maybe I'll stop there, let you answer that, and then I have one more for you.
So many. I think, when I saw the question, trying experiences, I really didn't have that many trying experiences here at Wesleyan. You know, I think one of the things that really, in my first year at Wesleyan, was that, you know, you always think you're very prepared academically, and I came from a Cardinal Spellman High School in the Bronx, which was academically rigorous. But I also was preparing to be pre-med. So one of my academic transitions was into the sciences here at Wesleyan, which was very, very tough because my first semester, I got an E+ in biology and ended up on academic probation. So that was probably the most trying experience that I had here at Wesleyan because, I prepared one way for the sciences, and here at Wesleyan, you have to prepare totally different. So that was one of my trying experiences, but after that semester, in working and going to the dean's office, and we had one of the very best deans, Harron Battle, at that time. He referred me to, there was also a component of Prospect Wesleyan that was tutoring at that point, and referred me to one of the students, African-American woman, who was very good in the sciences, who helped me to understand how to study. So that experience could have been a very negative one, but was turned to a positive.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll move on to the others. What was sort of the social climate, academic climate? How many women of color? What were the women like? Did they galvanize? Did they meet with each other? What were their issues?
Okay. And I'll speak specifically regarding my freshman class and the class that I graduated with. There were 240 women in my class out of a class of 537. The classes were smaller. So there were 45% women, and this is, I think, the fourth class of women that had been admitted to Wesleyan. Of that class, there were 72 students of color. 37 of them were women. 35 men. So overall, the class was 7% women of color. 15% of the women were of color. So it's a little bit, I think now is the percentages are lower, but there was a commitment there. And socially, academically, I would say that they learned from, I think a couple of years ago when they had the class of 69, they learned from the class of 69 of not dispersing us into different dorms. We were concentrated in Foss Hill dorms 8, 9, and 10. There were some, I think, that were in Butterfield, and there were a couple that we don't know how ended up in Clark Hall. But the women of color were very, I would say, was very cohesive because we lived with one another. We had our classes. We also were not, I would say, exclusive of other students because they were also on our hall. We socialized with them. With the men of color, we had social, I look back and look at some of the women in my class and the men that they dated then, and some of them are still married today. Mm-hmm. So, there are long-lasting relationships that were formed in my class, and I think that may be the experience for all of us.
I'd like to turn it over to the rest of the panelists, and I'll start over here just so our heads keep turning. To what and to whom do you attribute your successes in college, and who were your resources that help you navigate your experience?
Let's see. I mean, I can name a few people specifically. Yanina Montero was a key part of my success at Wesleyan. My first year at Wesleyan was very turbulent. there was student activism that sort of escalated into kind of student distress, culminating in, you know, a kind of a number of attacks on Wesleyan buildings. And Yanina Montero was just, I wouldn't have gotten through the year without her. But after that year, many people, faculty at Wesleyan, including Don Moon, who was my advisor in the government department in political theory, who God knows how I landed in the political theory department at Wesleyan. It was a tiny, tiny major in the government department. In fact, I do know how. A student who was my TA in the very first course that I knew I wanted to take at Wesleyan, called Moral Basis of Politics, which I think is still the first political theory course that people have to take, said, "You should be a political theory major." And I said, "What is political theory?" And he ushered me into the work that I still do intellectually. I mean, I didn't know what political philosophy was. No black people I knew what political philosophy was. And certainly my parents didn't know what political philosophy was. So those people were really important to me. And because, you know, I couldn't, at Wesleyan, I couldn't, for whatever reason, I mean, this is a long story, and I'm sure I'll tell some of it, but I couldn't commit to an English major when I was at Wesleyan. I didn't think that an English major was appropriately rigorous or something. And I thought that because, you know, I had an idea of myself as a person who had to work for a living. I do have to work for a living. And I thought that the English major was in some way going to reroute me from my chosen law school path or something like that, which it turned out to be, I mean, that turned out to be completely false. More on that later. But in the meantime, though, there were people in AFAM and in English whose courses were rich and important, and that there was a Mellon Fellow here, Sharon Holland, who my last year at Wesleyan, when I was writing my honors thesis, really cared for my work in a way that no one had really ever cared for before. And I mean, the list could go on and on and on. So, is there a second?
Well, I was actually, you know, and my husband will say, I think everyone, you know, they'll say, you've mentioned that before, but I was actually lucky enough to grow up in a family that really valued education. And I attribute a lot of my success to my parents. You know, they're hardworking immigrants, you know, manual labor jobs all their life, but they were always very focused and very much about, you know, I need to do this and do what's best for my family. And as someone who left their home to, you know, have their children grow up somewhere else, it was very important to them to make sure that we were taking advantage of every opportunity. And so education was always like the #1 priority. I mean, I wanted to be a dancer, I wanted to be an actress, I wanted to do anything, like I wanted to paint, you know, and my dad was like, that's great and you can do it, but you need a background that you can, a foundation that you can fall on, and you know, you'll be a starving artist like for your whole life, but if you have an education, if that doesn't pan out, guess what, there are other things that you can do. So that was like my initial, I would say the foundation of where like I found my success. But also when I was in high school, I was also part of an extracurricular academic program. You know, I was in this college-bound program where we were doing like Saturday writing classes. Like I would spend my Saturdays doing essays and with this program and doing debates and learning how to be a public speaker. And So I also credit a lot of my success here to that, because just a public school education, I don't think would have been enough, but I spent 4 years going to this program every day for 3 hours after school, plus Saturdays, plus internships during the summer and debate programs. And that's how I spent my free time during high school. I didn't go to a lot of movies or dances or parties. You know, it's funny because my husband says, hey, did you watch such and such a movie like Star Wars? And I'm like, no. I can't believe you don't know that movie. I'm like, well, I was never allowed to go to the movies. This is what I was doing in my free time. And then when I got to Wesleyan, I did find a lot of support, not only from the staff, but from people in admissions and the dean's office. I think one of the great things about Wesleyan is just how accessible the staff and the teachers and the professors are. You can just schedule time with them, and if you're having an issue in one of their classes, just say, hey, I want to drop by. Professor Plaus, who's in the psychology department, he was like my advisor, and I was a psychology major, and there was never a time when I would say, hey, I'm having difficulty in this class, or I'm having difficulty in this, that he would say, well, I don't have time, don't come by, I'm just too busy, I have too many students. No, I think people really, really open the door here in terms of professors and staff members to be supportive of the students that are here. And I really appreciated that. And then, of course, there were my friends who, you know, I met my husband here at Wesleyan. That's him right there. I talk about him a lot, but he's a great guy. And, you know, he would study with me. We would study together. That was one of the things we did. So we always found, you know, somebody who had like similar goals and a similar desire to succeed, and you surround yourself with those people and they motivate you to succeed. And I found a lot of people like that at Wesleyan also.
So as I, again, sort of reflect upon my 7 years here total, I was an undergraduate for 4, and then I worked here in the admission office after graduation. I agree, you know, sort of, I'm so passionate about Wesleyan as an institution because I think this place made me the person I am, to be perfectly honest. And as I think about sort of my intellectual journey, I had a similar experience as Simone did, in the sense that when I arrived on campus, I was convinced that I was going to go to law school. And I will be very honest and say that the only reason that I thought that I was going to go to law school was because I loved a TV show. For those of you of a similar age, it was called LA Law. This was an extraordinarily popular show when I was in high school, so, and for what it's worth, there's some family history with the law as well. But during the spring of my freshman year, I just looked at the philosophy department because I had never ever been exposed to philosophy before. And I took a very intensive class about Plato's Republic, which is sort of I think one of the foundational texts in philosophy, and it was taught by a gentleman who I think had taught at that point for about 35 years. So to make a long story short, I completely changed my intellectual and sort of academic trajectory and announced to my parents at Thanksgiving of my sophomore year that I was going to be a philosophy major. And similar to what you described, that did not necessarily go over well initially. But all kidding aside, I think what was remarkable is that journey of being a philosophy student taught me how to think and taught me how to learn. And those skills I have absolutely carried with me ever since. So I'm extraordinarily grateful for the fact that I was given the chance to really expand my horizons in ways that I didn't even anticipate. And having the opportunity to do that sort of work in the environment that you describe, one where people are here to support you, it was just phenomenal. On a sort of a social and emotional side, I too would turn to Yanina Montero on sometimes an hourly basis as the need arose. She was a senior administrator here, faculty member certainly, but I do have to say that the peer-to-peer connections here really were so fundamentally important to my growth. I think what I appreciated about Wesleyan was the fact that we could all step out of our own lives, if that made sense. So, you know, I had a very particular upbringing culturally and otherwise, but by virtue of the folks who I was surrounded with and by virtue of all of their generosity, I was able to learn things and experience things that I never thought I'd have the opportunity to do. So as an admission officer, I often told students that I learned more outside of the classroom than I did inside of the classroom. And that's in no way to diminish, again, the power of Wesleyan as an academic and intellectual institution. But when I reflect upon, either trying times or, silly times or times that really sort of bring a smile on my face, it was the interactions with my peers and the relationships that I've had the opportunity to enjoy since I left this institution.
The next story I want to share with you, I'd like to also see if my panelists here had similar experiences. I too had resources on campus that certainly led to my successes and defined who I became, but most importantly, I also had resources off campus that certainly defined where I lived after Wesleyan. The one individual I have to mention, I'm glad Maria mentioned her partner, is my partner in life, who's here in the audience. I won't point him out, but he was certainly my anchor. I met him here at Wesleyan. Without him, I don't think I would have made it through. But I also was able to establish connections with the Community Action Agency in town. I tutored adults for GED. I tutored Latinos who wanted to learn English. And it gave me the roots of what my parents thought were always very important, that no matter how little you have, you can always give something back to your own community. And that actually ended up being the jobs that I had after Wesleyan. So it was very important to me, that grounding and roots, and remembering that no matter how difficult Wesleyan might have been for me at times, that I could give more to other individuals, and that the privilege of being at Wesleyan was so deep for me. And as you can tell, I'm shaking. It's very personal. It's extremely emotional, because I understand how many people did not have the opportunity to be at such a phenomenal institution like Wesleyan. So I'm just wondering if any of you had resources also off campus that helped. Go ahead.
I think the main resource I had off campus was my mother, because she was very education oriented. She raised 3 children after my father left, and she was always there. She came up to campus back then we didn't have the phenomenal family weekends that we have now, but she came up, she would visit, she would, take care of us, send us care packages. And I think one of the things that I always remember is that she did this while also working a full-time job, sometimes working a part-time job in addition to her nursing. She was a nurse, and also going on to finish her own college degree. So she was one of the resources off campus, that my brother and I always would, call on to be there, and she was there without calling.
I think I would echo the importance of my family. And I will say that, Wesleyan in many ways was a very turbulent time for me as an undergraduate, because I was growing so quickly and I was growing in so many unexpected ways. And I think my parents were a bit bewildered, to be honest, in the sense that, they had educational experiences outside of the US. So for them, I think understanding what college was like here was a journey that they had to go on. And Simone referred to some campus turbulence that deeply affected our freshman year. And I think that, for me, it really affected how I wanted to think of myself as a member of this community and how I wanted to contribute. And so going home and sharing those experiences I think they led to very productive conversations, but again, I think my parents, they were on their own journey. So as I reflect upon, sort of as a family, how we embraced Wesleyan, there was a tremendous amount of growth. But I too was extremely lucky to have parents who, continued to be passionate about learning. And learning in multiple contexts, so informal learning and formal learning. So without that support, I don't know if I would have had sort of the foundation that I had to sort of feel comfortable and confident about doing some things that were a little scary when I was, 18, 19 years old.
And the best part for me was there were things here that were a little shocking to me. I grew up in a sort of, my parents were very old-fashioned, conservative. They didn't really, I wasn't exposed to a lot of things growing up, and then getting to Wesleyan and, being in a co-ed floor with, guys and, a lot of, the liberal part of Wesleyan and, walking around, and we were here at a time when chalking was allowed and people would write like the most like shocking things on the sidewalk, and, being able to go home an hour and a half away when I was like, okay, this is too much, I think I need to go back, that was important to me as well. And I was always of the mindset, oh my God, I grew up in such a, strict sort of old-fashioned family that I can't wait to go to college and be like 6 hours away so that I can do whatever I want. But, having that foundation of my family and then realizing that I was close and that I can just go home on a weekend whenever I felt like it, that was sort of important as well. And, I also mentioned this program that I was in. That's also something that off campus, I'm still involved in that program, and I started it. It's called Legal Outreach. We still filter. They filter about 3 or 4 people to Wesleyan every year, and being able to still be a part of that. And this was a decision that I made in 8th grade. I joined this program in 8th grade, followed it through high school. They were there anytime I needed any kind of support in college, and now I'm still like heavily involved with them. So that was also something off campus that I really appreciate, just being involved in something outside of Wesleyan.
Well, well, I'd like to ask, were there any prejudice or misconceptions you dealt with based on your ethnicity as a student here at Wesleyan or in the workplace that you're in now?
Yes. But it was, I came to Wesleyan in 1989. So one of the things that, I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to a large urban public high school. Ethnic conflict and racism were not news to me when I came to Wesleyan, I think, and the conversations that took place in my house were very sophisticated about the nature of politics and racism and institutional racism. And I think I had a pretty good understanding for a 17-year-old when I came to Wesleyan about what some of the challenges would be, particularly because I had been, before I went to this large public high school, in a very conservative, traditional girls' school in Philadelphia, which was heartbreaking in terms of their complete lack of understanding of diversity and what it meant to support students of color, even in a very, very tiny school. There were only 70 students in my class, and there were four students of color in that class. And I left in part because I got the impression at that time that my academic competitiveness was making people uncomfortable. And there were a number of efforts in that place to limit my access to resources and to push back against my academic success, which were clearly racially motivated. And so I had that experience as a very, very young person. I mean, I was 14 when I left that place. So when I came to Wesleyan, it was like heaven. And I mean, it really was. I experienced it as a completely transformed private institution. That what I knew about private education was negative. And when I came to Wesleyan, the experience that I had was really, was very, very good. I say that even though during my first year at Wesleyan, I was involved on a daily basis in student activism about diversity and inclusion, that really took over my life that year, and it was one of the most passionate experiences that I've ever had outside of my own home, like to become involved in a conversation about the nature of nuanced, very, very complicated institutional limits on the capacity to recognize the potential and the limitations on the potential of individual human beings. And so, you know, that's a hard conversation to have, but Wesleyan was able to have that conversation. And that's why it's special. Not because it always does the right thing, but at least at that time, the capacity of the administration not to call the police, as the CUNY system does now, when there's student activism on campus, and, you know, to allow the New York City Police Department to, you know, rough students up, beat them up, put them in jail. At Wesleyan, you know, we could have had some of that. And it didn't, I mean, you know, there was a time at the end of the year when I, along with a number of other students who were active in a student coalition that was pushing on some diversity questions, we met with the dean of the college every morning, and Bro Adams, who was at that time a special assistant to the president, to try to resolve some of the outstanding issues, including faculty diversity, many, many issues. And that was extraordinary. I mean, it was, when I look back on that experience as a former lawyer, when I look back on that experience as, you know, just a person 20 years later, I kind of can't believe it happened. I can't believe it. And it was, I mean, I learned so much. I learned about, you know, I learned what people ought to do, how to work hard on these questions. So.
You're in the same class, right?
So, you know, Simone and I keep referring to a particularly turbulent year. It was a year that was characterized by some particular incidents on campus that prompted some very, very difficult conversations about issues of race. And I think we were struggling, well, first of all, we were first-year students, so it was quite an overwhelming experience to be exposed to when we were ourselves, I think, just transitioning to what it meant, you know, to be in college. But I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. I think what was particularly unique about Wesleyan, what is unique about Wesleyan, given that the president in his introductory remarks was speaking about the continued commitment of this community to address issues that are oftentimes difficult and, let's be frank, not always addressed in the world outside of this community, is a willingness to embrace the unknown and a willingness to own up to some very, very difficult, I think, and very painful at times realities. So what I learned when I was here, and sometimes people are very uncomfortable when I say this, is that we, living in the US, this is just my opinion, living in the US, I think it's very, very difficult for anyone to somehow distance themselves from prejudice or racist thoughts. I think we are bombarded with them on an ongoing basis. We live in a culture where institutionalized racism and institutionalized discrimination continues to go forward. So I think when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, when you're here and you're grappling with sort of the magnitude of those societal forces, but you're here within this environment, I think the challenge is to figure out how you contribute to dialogue and discourse. And I think what was extraordinary about Wesleyan, again, and I agree with how Simone sort of depicted the range of emotions that we experienced, was that the administration was willing to let us have those conversations. Now, this is not to assert that we always were in agreement. I think that year was characterized by sort of a lot of pendulum swings in terms of how we as a community grappled with the issues, but there was an institutional commitment to have open dialogue and to give students the space to be heard, and I think that was tremendously empowering. And that set of skills that I think I learned as an activist, again, I continue to carry with me. Just one example, Simone, you had obviously very particular roles. I mean, I was invited to serve on a presidential task force to look at issues of institutional racism on campus in the spring of my freshman year. And I think that was, again, an indication on the part of senior administrators, faculty, and staff to recognize what was happening on campus and recognize that this was having deep impact on students and that the campus had a moral obligation to address these issues head on. And not every institution, I think, would have the courage to do that. So I fully respected the space that we were accorded. I think there are ongoing challenges that need to be addressed, and I think that's part of any institutional journey. But I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to have those discussions at a place like Wesleyan, because I know how to talk about issues of race now in different ways, and I know how to address issues or institutionalized issues, and those skills I carry with me every day in my own job. Very quickly, you asked about examples of discrimination. I think one of the challenges that I grapple with that it mystifies me, I have to say, is that people to this day assume that I wasn't born in the US. They ask me how I speak English so well. I had faculty members here who very innocently, asked me when I came to the US, and so, I did grapple with those challenges. As a professional in the education policy world, I am usually the only person of color in a room. And I could go on and on and on about this, but as we are sort of looking at issues of underachievement for particular communities, and as there is increasing conversation about achievement gaps that disproportionately affect our students of color, students from lower income families, and students who are English language learners, among others, it concerns me greatly that we are not sitting at those policy tables while decisions are being made about our communities. So that's just an example, I think, of the challenge that we face within my field.
Maria, if I can ask you to speak a little bit about the Latino community on campus when you were here, how you felt, did you feel that you belonged? How did you think the Latino community was relating with the larger community? If you could speak to that, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think when I was here, there was a very tight-knit Latino community, and I found that community, and I really did feel like I belonged to that community. If you would go to the campus center for lunch, you would see a bunch of us sitting together and eating together, and I felt like at the time when I was here was very united. We weren't separated by ethnic groups. It was just the Latino community, and whether you were Puerto Rican or Mexican or Dominican, we were all one, and the thing that united us all was the fact that we were Latino and that we had, a similar background or a similar experience, or that, we spoke Spanglish because it was cool among us to speak Spanglish, and so we connected very well together. If I could just say a couple of things that I felt could have been better or that could have improved at the time is I also felt like it was a little bit insular. Where if you hung out with you would sit with the Latino table, but brought it like another friend or if that wasn't Latino, maybe not that they weren't accepted, but maybe they weren't as comfortable because with us we all knew each other very well. But I myself, when I was here, made it a point to get to know other people from other communities, and like some of my best friends now are, one of my best friends in college was African American. Some of my best friends now, I actually have a lot of friends that are Asian, because I myself took the initiative to get to meet people and get to know people of different backgrounds and different experiences, and I tell that a lot to students when they're in college. It's so easy to gravitate towards something that we feel is familiar to us and people that we feel we can connect with, but the real challenge is to get to know people outside of that and to feel comfortable outside of that. So I tell people, don't just because, there's a Latino group on campus, yes, work for it, you're Latino, be proud of who you are and join it and do it. But at the same time, seek out other types of people and other people with other experiences and make friends all over campus, because when you go into the real world, that's what the real world is. And when you're there and you are met with people who don't share what you have, then you will feel comfortable around them and you don't feel any less than they are, that your background is any less than theirs. You feel confident and comfortable doing that. So I always say, it's great to have a very good, well, tight-knit community, but at the same time, don't just feel this is where I belong, because that's not true. You belong where you go and what experiences you create for yourself. Another thing is also there was a lot of people from New York or Boston, and we all had that in common. New Yorkers, Latinos from New York, Latinos from Boston, and there was that common connection there. So I felt like a lot of other types of Latinos, like people from the West Coast or Chicanos, they didn't feel as they belonged as much as everybody else did. And so we'd always, we'd make fun of it at the time and say, who's that random Latino out there? But maybe because they didn't feel as comfortable as everybody else who came from the big cities and were from New York or Boston or Puerto Rican or Dominican, or they had different experiences. So I felt like if I had to say, those were the things I needed to improve at the time, but was to just allow for more diversity of Latino-ness in the group and maybe people from other backgrounds. But in terms of what the Latino community was, I do feel that it was very tight-knit and that we were always very supportive of each other.
Thank you. I want to ask you, Joyce, because I think you're the only one here who was really at Wesleyan at a time when gender was a little bit imbalanced. I mean, I think our classes, women are the majority or close to 50-50. What was that like as a woman of color with a small marginal group of women to be in an environment where the majority were men? How did they treat you as women of color, women? If you could speak a little bit to that.
I think one of the things that with my class and the classes of the 70s rather, classes of the 70s, was that with my class, I think that there probably was beginning to be gender balance, because my class was about 45% women were in the class. The classes that came before me, class of 76, 75, I know there were probably much more gender imbalance in that class. That the relationship between men and women on campus, for the most part, I would say was pretty good. We worked. We went to class together. We played together, in various ways. But but there was respect between the men and the women on campus. And while there may have been some incidents, there really weren't that many, as I remember when I was on campus. And I would have to say, like I had said before, a lot of the men and women in my class, actually, several of them, are still married today. Going on 30. This past year was my 35th reunion. So some of them got married very shortly, week or two after we graduated. So I would say that the relationship on campus was very good. It was a smaller community. Plus, one of the things I would have to say is that we did not have the number of clubs and that are currently on campus. We had Ujamaa. Ujamaa was the student organization that African American students, that was it. We didn't have any sororities or fraternities on campus, it was Ujamaa. So it was familyhood. So when we had our meetings, at the Malcolm X house, there was a camaraderie there. There was respect. We had meetings, and it was a situation where men as well as women were in the leadership. And I have to say that while I was here, and I think several years after, one of the key people that was supportive and kept us on track was Dean Edgar Beckham. Dean Beckham, he would feed us information behind the scenes so that we would know what to do in certain situations. And he was one of the key people that students of color went to if they were in trouble, if they weren't in trouble. He was a key person.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point because I came to Wesleyan in '79, graduated in '83, and came back to Wesleyan as a staff working in the graduate office and now in the dean's office. And the difference that I have seen in the student population when I was at Wesleyan was the way in which the student of color population worked with each other. We were a coalition. We had our differences, and we had different ways of doing things, and there's certainly, I can remember arguments and, screaming and being loud, but at the end of the day, our demands, our voice was one. And I don't often see that. I think slowly it's beginning to dawn on students here now that working together really makes sense. I'd like to know, and I'm going to point to you, Simone, can you talk about that experience when you were here as a student of color? What was it like working with others and clubs, women, men? Did you have the same experience as the three of you in the 90s as we did?
Excuse me. Well, first of all, I'm going to push back a little bit against the familyhood thing. I had lots of wonderful experiences in the Black community at Wesleyan. And when I say that my dearest friends are today from that community, I mean, really, they are. They, make my life better every day. Also, the experience that I had as a member of that student coalition that year has been with me all my life as a model of how to coalesce. I mean, how do you coalesce? What is a coalition? How do you form one? How do you make decisions? What is consensus? Like, these were things that we thought about all the time and that I learned a lot from in other organizations. It turns out that I'm actually not a joiner at all. I really am not. That doesn't mean that I wasn't a member of lots of organizations, not only at Wesleyan, but in other places. At Harvard Law School, I was a member of the Women of Color organization there, which was really important to me. But I do want to say, in terms of gender, one of the things I learned at Wesleyan was what sexism was. I really did. I mean, I learned that as a woman of color, my experience on Wesleyan's campus as one of a relatively small number of folks, that there was a kind of expectation that the men on campus would take leadership positions. Not necessarily officially, because women were always in leadership roles in official campus organizations, but there was a kind of culture of like male dominance. And that's just because there's a culture of male dominance. There wasn't, I don't think that was necessarily more pronounced at Wesleyan than it was in other places. But because the community was relatively small, I think I perceived it in a different way. And I began to understand that I kind of got my feminist oats going here in an important way. I mean, it was really, I really do credit Wesleyan with kind of alerting me to the reality of my situation as a woman who was very serious about gender. And, my husband, who tells me that my gender is a little off, he tells me a little off. I'm married to a man, right? And yeah, I mean, I think he's just trying to say that I live as a woman in a way that is alert to, to the possibilities of, being oppressed as a woman, and that I don't want that in my life. And I do think that Wesleyan really helped me to understand what that meant.
I definitely agree. I think that, one of the great things that I found about Wesleyan and being a woman is that I definitely learned about feminism here and about being a strong woman. I mean, I had a very good background also because, my husband will tell you that the women in my family are very strong also, and they pretty much, run the households a lot of the times, and the men are just kind of in the periphery. But here was where I learned, not him though, no, not him, not him at all. But I did come from that background of strong women, but here was really where I began to see myself as an equal, as somebody who could be in a male-dominated field. And I'm telling you, my field is very male-dominated. I mean, as a woman, you for example, big news network anchors are men, and they have gray hair, and the older they get, the more distinguished and the more respect people have for them. Women just get old. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Women just get old in my field, and as soon as you don't start looking young and fresh and cute, and then you're replaced by someone younger and fresher and nicer. So it's very hard as a woman to maintain yourself in this industry. But Wesleyan made me a very strong person, and I'll give you an example. This happened only a month or two ago. I was a bunch of press. We were all invited to interview Pelé, the great soccer player, Brazilian. And there was an event where he was doing some things with children, and they had a bunch of media there who were recording this, and then got to talk to him in a press conference afterwards. But they only invited 4 media outlets to actually sit in a round table with him and do something a little more intimate. So they invited CNN and ESPN, EFE, which is an international Spanish news network, and I think the other one was the AP, the Associated Press. And I'm the only woman at this table at this point. And they said, okay, these are the rules. There was this guy moderating the whole thing. He said, these are the rules. We're gonna go you in this direction. It's gonna be you, and you. I was last. And each of you are gonna get 2 questions, and Pelé will answer them. So we go through the first round, and we all get our questions in, and he answers them. Then Pelé talks and he talks and he talks. So we're sort of running out of time. So he goes to the 3. Okay, you go. Okay, great. Now you go. Now you go. And then it was my turn for my second question. And he said, oh, you know what? I think we're out of time. That's it. And I turned around and I said, I am the only woman at this table, and you're gonna skip me? I don't think so. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry. I just thought you guys were from the same network. I said, actually, no, we're not. So I'm gonna get my second question in. Thank you very much. And I did this in front of everybody. You could see all the guys like, but guess what? I got my second question in, and I was the only Spanish-speaking network there, and so I had all this sound in English. I'm like, that's great, but you know what? I can't give this to my network. I need a lot more stuff in Spanish, so I'm gonna get my second question in. And I can tell you, that background and that way of just feeling like I can do it, I can do anything that any guy can do, and maintaining myself in my field, I learned here at Wesleyan.
I mean, I'll just speak quickly on this, but you know, I think what's so comical sometimes, for lack of a better word, as a person of color and being of Asian descent, is that I often have, you know, people who tell me I'm not acting the way I should. You know, that you're not acting like an Asian woman should. And when I challenge them on that, I think folks have, you know, particular, you know, sort of images about, you know, a more sort of deferential, or you know, someone who's not so outspoken, or someone who just is not as aggressive or as forward. And I too have very strong women in my life, and I've been very privileged to be able to learn from them. But I completely agree. I think Wesleyan gave me the confidence to be able to stand up for myself in different situations, both as a woman of Asian descent and as a woman of color. But separate from that, just as a woman, I think there's a whole other set of challenges that would merit probably, you know, 15 West seminars, but we won't go there for now. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's, you learn here within the context of a relatively safe and supportive environment how to address these very, very difficult issues. And we're all on our own journeys. I don't think you ever stop learning how to do that, but the fact that those skills and commitment, I think you see across all of us a commitment to social justice and equity, you know, that was born here for some of us. Or maybe if it wasn't born here, we were given the opportunity to expand upon what we had already experienced. And I think that's a tremendous credit to this institution.
I was, my senior year, I lived on Home Ave, 77 Home Ave. It was one of the best experiences I ever had. There were 5 neurotic women living together. We had a worksheet on our refrigerator of the kind of, everyone had a job to do each week with the cleanest house on campus. People would come and look at it. But I mean, I can remember the conversations we had, the talks we had about what we were going to do with our lives and who we were and how we identified ourselves or trying to evolve and become. And it's pretty funny because of the 5 of us, 2 of us kept our names when we married, and the other 3 changed their names. And we still talk about that. And you know, we respect the decisions we made, and I think if we learned anything, Wesleyan was really, for me, serious awareness about my sense as a woman in this world that is constantly controlled by men, and how to break of that and become partners in the professional and the personal world that we live in. What I'd like you to continue to think about and share with us is how those struggles you've had, those realizations you've had, what you would share with the young men and women who are here today, who are still at Wesleyan. Can I see, by show of hands, who is a Wesleyan student right now? Great, thanks, I'm so glad you're here. What pearls would you share? They have an opportunity to continue while they're still here. What would you share with them about the struggles that you've had as college students and breaking into employment post-West?
I've been waiting to say this. Okay.
We cued that.
Okay, so the thing that I want people, this is what I tell my students when they ask me. Usually I just talk about American literature, but when they ask me, I tell them, when I was at Wesleyan and I was headed straight to law school, I was sure of that. I did in fact head straight to law school. I graduated from Wesleyan in 1993. I went to Harvard Law School. I was there by fall 1994, and I was done in 1997. I then practiced law in the most miserable condition that anyone could ever be in for several years. And then I started thinking about what I really wanted to do with my life. So I am a late bloomer for all intents and purposes. And when I went back to school, to graduate school, to get a Master's of Fine Arts degree, because I wanted to be a poet, you know, it was I really felt that I had wasted years of my life. Well, I didn't waste years of my life, but I think that the greatest thing about Wesleyan and being here as a person, is that you don't have to wait until 10 years after you graduate to figure out that what you really want to do is be a starving artist. You don't have to wait. I mean, this is the amazing thing about Wesleyan, that there are resources here that can help you to figure out how you want to conduct your life. And there are people who can help you to figure out if in fact you do want to be a dancer or you do want to be a painter. There's going to be somebody here who will tell you how they went about accomplishing that goal and stay alive, right? And, you know, to stay alive, and what does that mean? What does it mean to want to do those things? You know, there are Wesleyan alumni, there are people teaching on campus every day who do things that, I mean, seriously, like I didn't know you could live your life. I mean, I just didn't know. I wish I had known. And, you know, all the things that it turns out Harvard Law School is not a bad place. If you want to be a lawyer, I suggest that you should go there if you want. But it's not the only thing in the world. And I think it's so important that, you know, that places like Wesleyan stop worrying so much in some ways about, you know, the humanistic disaster that's coming to meet us. Like, the humanities are a crucial component for all of us. Like, we have to figure out how to live in the world. And without the humanities, I'm just not sure that we can do it. And I think that, you know, Wesleyan has become more conservative over the last 20 years. And I do think that one of the things that I'm going to continue to tell my students is, you know, you have to push back against the continuing professionalization of every single thing in the world. Like, you have to have some joy in your life.
Yeah. Okay. No, please. I agree. I agree with a lot of that. I think if I had any advice to give about people's time at Wesleyan, is just to be very open-minded and to explore and to, you know, dig into everything and, you know, take classes that you never thought you'd even be interested in, and go to student groups that, you know, are doing things that you're like, what is that? And I would never do that, but do it, because this is going to be the place where you can be freer to have the liberty to do most of the things you want to do without feeling like you have responsibilities, you know, of bills or anything like that. So take advantage of this time to really explore. Don't feel like you need to have everything figured out in this moment, because the more you do that, the more of a well-rounded, open-minded individual you become. And when you go out into the world, then you will have experienced so many things that nothing's going to shock you and nothing's going to surprise you. And when you see an obstacle, you're going to say, you know, I've dealt with that before. So, you know, just take advantage of the opportunities. Don't become insular. Don't say, these are the kind of people I want to hang out with. These are the kind of classes I want to take because this is the path that I'm on. Just take advantage of your time here, because you're free to do so. Because later on in life, you're not going to be that free to do so. When you graduate and you see the loans, the bills coming in, you're going to say, you know what, I wish I would have taken that dance class at Wesleyan because now I need a job. So that would be my biggest advice. If I could give advice to Wesleyan in terms of after college, it would be to improve the network for us who graduate. A lot of times I feel like I'm in media and I don't know a lot of alumni who are in media. I wish I did. I wish, you know, I did a search on LinkedIn the other day and put Wesleyan media, and a lot of people came up that I never met or never, you know, heard of, and, you know, I started connecting with them. So if I could give them advice, it would be make it easier for us when we graduate to find people who are doing things that we want to do. And I know a lot of other bigger universities are great with their network. I mean, you just call somebody up and say, I graduated from the school, and they're like, oh, great, come on over. And, you know, I find it a little I haven't found it as easy to find these people at Wesleyan, but I'm sure that if I did call somebody from Wesleyan up, they'd be very open to helping me, but I wish I knew who was out there a little better than I do. But otherwise, great experience.
When I look back at Wesleyan and the path that I originally started on, which was pre-med, and I got advice from a professor, I think it was my sophomore year, when I wanted to declare for biology as a major, and he said, I don't think you should do that. To really listen to your advisors, but also listen to your inner voice. Because with that, he said, I would advise you not to major in biology, but to take as many biology courses as you can if you still want to be pre-med, and major in something else, which is what I did. I majored in sociology, but I made my sociology major one in which it was focused towards public health. And I am very glad that I did that, because that has been my career, that has been my love for the past 30 years. And you need to listen to your inner voices as to what you think is your right path and to follow it. Because I think otherwise, if you come out with, a professional degree that, as Simone said, she wasn't very happy with, then you may have spent some years not doing what you think you want to do. But if you engage with your fellow students, with your professors, with those who are outside of the university, engage with other alum who are very willing to talk with you about issues of career, anything, that you listen to them, but you also listen to your heart so that you can follow your pathway outside of Wesleyan. One of the things that I was fortunate to do, I did go immediately to graduate school in public health, but I also have been engaged with the university in an ongoing relationship. And I would urge you to continue. When you graduate, you don't leave Wesleyan. You stay engaged, because there are students who come behind you who need your support and need your advice. No matter what stage you are in, if you're a recent graduate, if you're further out, I've been engaged with the university since I've graduated from Wesleyan. And it will bode you well for those leadership opportunities. And the other thing I would say is, as Maria said, take advantage of the time that you have here to get engaged inside your academics, but also outside, because those are going to be some of your long-lasting relationships with your fellow students.
So just quickly, I have two words that I'd like to sort of share with you. So the first, or phrases rather, the first is to really own this campus. And what I mean by that is, yes, take advantage of opportunities, take risks, explore, but you as a member of this community have every right to not only critique this institution, but think about your role as a contributor to the community that you're creating. And I think when I reflect upon my 4 years, certainly I was very active in a number of groups on campus, but I think there were times where, I thought of myself as being here for only 4 years, and so, maybe because of that duration, it wasn't that it wasn't appropriate for me to participate in discourse, but I think I didn't fully recognize how powerful the student voice is. So own this campus and really take advantage of the opportunity to express yourself and work in concert with other members of this community to enhance it on a continual basis. The second thing I would say is just have confidence in yourselves. I think college is a wonderfully sort of exhilarating time. It's also really scary, I think, and you know the growth and the journey that we've all described, both academically and socially, emotionally. I think it can be sometimes a lot to take in, but have confidence in the choices that you make. You're making the right decisions at the time because you're thinking about where you are now. You know, just because you choose a particular major today and then you decide 5 years after graduation that you're going to switch your career, I don't think you should regret maybe the initial choice that you made, but just recognize that it's a journey and things are going to shift for you. So be confident in yourselves, and that's something that I wish more folks had said to me when I was here in my early 20s trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. But we really appreciate your interest in listening to our stories, so thank you.
We are going to open it up to Q&A for a few minutes, and then Tanya Bowers from the class of 1994 is going to come up and join us and close this session for us. But can you please, one more time, help me to thank these 4 amazing women who are right here. Any questions? Oh, come on.
Got a mic?
There's a mic right there.
Thank you for sharing. It's been very interesting, and it's wonderful to hear the kinds of experiences that you've had when you were here. If you could each give Wesleyan one recommendation so that the next generation of women who are going to be students, perhaps of color, would have the best experience possible, what would you say is the path forward? What should Wesleyan be looking forward to make this a better place?
I would say that Wesleyan should actively diversify its faculty. Every single minute, I think they should be thinking about diversifying its faculty. That's what we should do.
I think the other piece of that is to actively diversify its administration, because I think one of the things that I have seen as a trustee is that the leadership, it's getting a little bit more diverse, but it needs to be even more so.
So I think in terms of the academic and the intellectual space, what I would love to see Wesleyan do is to continue to offer more courses that are reflective of students' experiences. There's a tremendous amount of student diversity here in terms of backgrounds, perspectives, and there are academic disciplines that I think have yet to be explored fully by this institution. So in concert with thinking about diversifying the faculty, diversifying curricula, and really, thinking about, creating spaces for folks to talk about issues that aren't, let's say, usually discussed, I think would be a tremendous step forward for this institution.
I think I talked a little bit about it before. Beyond, I think one of the things that could improve is life beyond Wesleyan as well. With the institution, a lot of us don't come from backgrounds where we know a lot of people, and you'll see the job market out there is very difficult, it's very competitive. You need more skills than you ever needed even when I graduated. I mean, I think the norm when I graduated was if you didn't have a job, then you were the odd man out, because everybody graduated with a job, and now it's the opposite. Now a lot of people graduate and they don't have jobs and they can't find a job, and it's a competitive world. So I think that Wesleyan, in terms of, after your experience here, the next step is how to help us transition outside of the experience here and to be more supportive in that aspect. And like I said, a lot of times now jobs are found because you know your dad knows this person, or you know that person, or you know that person, and sadly that's the way things happen. And a lot of us don't come with that kind of network inherently, so we need that kind of network. And I feel like if Wesleyan did strengthen more of that after Wesleyan network, then it would make things easier for your experience outside of Wesleyan.
Another question? Anyone else?
It's an interesting question because there were very few of us who were in the sciences back in the 70s. And I could probably count on one hand the number in my class that actually graduated as a biology major or went on to medical school. So, you know, I still consider myself in the sciences because I'm in public health, but a different, not the natural sciences piece of it, but more on the prevention end, because I think the combining, there has to be people who go into those hard biological sciences, chemistry, biology, but we also have to gear our young women, and probably public health is one of the fields where there probably is a little bit more gender balance than in some of the other sciences. But I think that it's important for Wesleyan to continue to, with the McNair and with all those other programs that came in many years after me, to really encourage women, not only women, but also men, to challenge themselves to be in the sciences, whether it's the biological fields or the other, what they would say, the soft science fields, because it's needed for all of them in order to improve health in this country.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I just had my batteries recharged. Pretty impressive, huh? Just to echo what President Roth said earlier, this is why. Because when we leave Wesleyan, we don't have enough opportunities to have frank discussions like the ones that we are able to have here. And I think the fact that we have been able to have them take place here prepares us to engage other people once we leave Wesleyan to have those same conversations. So I know I'm extremely grateful to have been here and to have been able to witness this esteemed panel in talking about their experiences at Wesleyan and beyond. When I was invited to give closing remarks, I looked at the list of my fellow alum, and I was extremely impressed because I knew so many of you from our time here at Wesleyan, and also my time as an alum and also as a television viewer. So it makes me extremely proud, and I know Dwight Greene would also be proud to see that his legacy lives on through the compassion, the fearlessness, the diversity, the personal and professional excellence that these women embody. And with that, I think we also need to thank everyone who made today's symposium possible. Everyone from our panelists, Simone, Maria, Marina, Seyun, Joyce, also to President Roth for enabling us to be here. David Hill, thank you so much. She's the chair of our Alumni of Color Council, which I have recently joined. Additionally, we have the Alumni of Color Network as well as the Black Alumni Council here at Wesleyan. We wouldn't be here if you all hadn't have shown up today. It's for you, it's for us. Wesleyan holds this space. So we want to thank the alum, the family, the friends, the parents, the students, the faculty and staff who showed up for this afternoon conversation. And today, just to remind ourselves, was something that was intended to complement the Women at Wesleyan program, this year-long initiative that has been taking place on campus. And Wesleyan also provides us with so many opportunities to continue the discussion. I hope that you all will be joining us. I believe we are going to be having a quick reception in the Zelnick. I'm pointing the wrong way. I'm sorry, it's been almost 20 years. In the Zelnick Pavilion, which is adjacent to the memorial, and then at 6 o'clock, are we still doing that? Okay, we're running a little bit over. At 6 o'clock, there is also going to be a celebration of women of color at Wesleyan. So we're all welcome to head over to Beckham Hall for the Alumni and Student of Color celebration. This is about the connectivity that Wesleyan represents. So let's head over there and be grateful that we won today, this afternoon outside, and that homecoming happens every year.
Turn this off.
Thanks so much, everyone.
One last thing. Oh, sorry. I just thank Greg, too, because he did a great job putting this together. So, stand up, Greg. I got 100 emails from Greg to be prepared for this, so I thank him.
Good call. Good call. Forgive my omission. All right. Thank you, everyone.